Alrighty. Here we go. Orange Pill Podcast with Max and Stacy. We are in San Salvador, and Stacy, as we've noted, there's very little traffic out there.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I'm in my Easter sort of outfit. This is Semana Santa. Well, I think it doesn't actually start until like Wednesday or Friday, but nevertheless, it's like starts earlier and earlier. You know, in the social media age, I feel like because we're so in touch with everybody online and we're so on top of the news and we see so much more than we did, 20 years ago, like you notice like you start all your holidays like a week or two before they actually used to begin. So you're just like, because your mind is already in the vacation space. So,
oh yeah, my mind dropped into the vacation space on Monday for sure, because this is some kind of holiday week leading into the holiday weekend. And I just felt like totally zoned out, which is great because I haven't really felt that in a while, maybe for months. Have I really felt like, oh, it's a holiday. And you know how everything kind of drops and the traffic slows down and your mind starts thinking like, oh, I can do that next week. And you get into that kind of what I call lizard brain. It's just like a lizard on a rock getting sun. And of course, the sun here is great. The weather is still great. The rainy season is threatening to kick in, but hasn't kicked in really for real. We heard the screaming bugs. Whatever those screaming bugs are, they herald the beginning of the rainy season. They sound like an alarm going off, like a car alarm, but they're bugs, some kind of bugs.
I think they're cicadas.
Cicadas,
right?
They're cicadas, and they're bugging out, and they're screaming. And it's the beginning of the rainy season, but the actual rains themselves, not so much, thankfully.
Right. So, well, I thought it was a weekend, and I was surprised when a friend sent us a message saying, hey, look, gold just soared through 2000. I was like, what do you mean? It's like Saturday or Sunday. Only Bitcoin trades on the weekend. And lo and behold, it was a weekday. So, while it is a holiday here and a lot of people are gone, the rest of the markets and the rest of the world, the US, Europe, are still like active. And gold, I looked over there and it was 2022. And so then I started to look and see what the news was. And of course, the news was that Finland had, become a member of Nato officially that same morning. And then you could see gold spike up. So I'm going to read you this really amazing tweet thread. It's just 2 tweets. It's like one of the best tweet threads I've ever read. And I wrote it.
Oh, that you wrote. Oh, I want to hear this.
So here it goes, because I think I was inspired and it worked well. So gold is signaling that boomers are still in charge and they are not going quietly. They want to go out with a big bang. Just as Hiroshima, Nagasaki heralded the age of the boomer, their war in Europe promises to send them off in the same way that they entered the world. So it was almost like celebratory. Of course, when Bitcoin goes up in the same sort of trajectory, usually it's like, you gotta pump it up, pump up. Like there's like fun and joy, right? Like, but when gold does that, it's like bad news. It's like always like on some dire situation like this. So I followed that up with a little bit further clarification of my thoughts. And Bitcoin is a bet on the future of humanity, using the words of Paul Tudor Jones, who had said that like 2 years ago. Gold is a bet on the boomer fantasies of nuclear annihilation being made real life. And the boomers have been preparing for the latter since they were first conceived in August 1945, which is when Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened. And the first boomers were born in 1946. So I'm saying like they were literally conceived amidst the fallout of a nuclear fallout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Bitcoin is the escape hatch from their hate asylum. And I just did a GIF looking for nuclear stuff. And I assumed like to find a GIF that was going to be, a nuclear explosion.
Mushroom cloud.
Yeah. Instead, it came, one of the first was duck and cover. And it's pretty remarkable seeing that because, I hadn't even thought of it totally dramatized exactly what I had tweeted, even though I hadn't tweeted that with that in mind, which is that they genuinely were conceived in the mushroom cloud, the boomers, the first of the boomers. And then their whole life was that, like this duck and cover, like preparing for this. Like it's, you look at those, and of course, it was totally ineffective, right? It was as fake as fucking QE in terms of fixing anything or fixing the risk or saving us in any way. That duck and cover, hiding under your desk would have saved you from nuclear fallout. But it also seems full circle to today with the Zoomers.
Yeah, well, I think, what you're getting at is that, literally speaking, the signifiers and the symbols and the signs of a cyclical turn
Yes.
are visually there. They're in the database. They came up with the duck and cover right away, which is a signifier of the boomer era.
Yeah.
And we're at that change in the cycle. The boomers are clearly now no longer in charge. The boomer era is clearly over. And so many other eras and cycles are coming to a turning point, the fourth turning, the Thucydides trap, which you like to talk about often. When one power rises and another power falls away, another empire, right? We're seemingly at a moment like this where the U.S. empire had a 100-year reign with the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency. Seemingly now that's coming to an end as well, to hit a cyclical turning point. All of the other countries out there that were forced to use the dollar are now not using the dollar. Most notably, two that I saw last week, aside from Russia and China, would be Saudi Arabia and Japan have also decided that they are no longer on the U.S. dollar as reserve currency bandwagon anymore. They're going to start trading commodities and something outside of the dollar. So, yeah, to your point there, so we're at this turning point. It's a cyclical turning point. And the duck and cover meme, as it was never called at the time, but now we do say this word, was symbolically representative of that era, particularly in the 1950s. So by the 1950s, you had the scare of atomic bombs dropping, and culturally, there was a lot of science fiction movies that came out at that time, a lot of fear of atomic war.
Yeah, and it is interesting that cycles like throw up the same memes or the same ideas or similar times. So back then you had this duck and cover, but the students today. So when I look at those, when I looked at those when I was a kid, though, they always seemed so foreign to me because we didn't have those by the time I was in school. But now I look at the news happening today in America, and then you see that again with Zoomers, right? You see them having to do duck and cover exercises for a mass shooting happen in the school. So there's like a top and tail, like there's a, like the cycles turning.
Yeah, this is, you mentioned this earlier, and this is the thing that really sunk in that I thought was really a fantastic insight into this, is that we have the duck and cover meme today in these grade schools where kids are running ways to protect themselves against mass shootings. They have Kevlar enhanced backpacks, and they're, instead of the nuclear foreign threat, atomic threat, it's the domestic shooter threat.
And actually, Michael Moore kind of linked those already back when he made Columbine, that film, like decades ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, which is the parents of those kids who massacred. That was one of the first huge mass shootings in schools and has triggered all those that follow. But their parents worked at like Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, one of the big, nuclear weapons makers, manufacturers of these war machines. And the other thing, of course, going on that's totally reflective of it, as you say, the 50s, when the duck and cover was huge, these like lame exercises in school, is that that was also the era of McCarthy. And we're in another McCarthy era, but from a different party. Back then it was the Republican Party, and this time it's now the Democratic Party. And we even have like the first ever president being indicted and arrested. And, today, as we record this, is that that's just happening today. So it's a total, it's just funny that we are on this hamster wheel of life, and these cycles collide, and maybe there's various, Ferris wheels and hamster wheels like colliding at the same time. And we often meet just like in the solar system of the galaxies and the planets crossing each other at every 150 years at that particular point. So it just seems like that it would make sense if everything is a fractal of each other in our universe, and this, whatever this matrix is, or this game or, video game we're in, it's like, it would make sense that the cycles, once they're back at that 150-year point, you would see the same planets or the same memes or the same ideas.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing. Michael Moore's film Bowling for Columbine, it came out approximately, I think you mentioned, might have been 25 years ago. I think it won the Academy Award that year for Best Documentary. There was some controversy about it. It wasn't really a documentary. But people really rejected the idea that the mass shootings came out of a culture of violence, because he made that point that the parents of these children were working for these major defense contractors, and that the American foreign policy is basically quite crude, right? It's one where if you don't trade in US dollars, we kill people in your country, and that's our foreign policy. And we've got every 50 cents of every tax dollar to back it up over there at the Pentagon, and their primary job is to back fiat money, the US dollar. And so it trickles down. So the violence trickles down to the high school mass shooter. And the society generally rejected that. And I think over this past 25 years, instead of a society coming to terms with that, they have metamorphosized into a freak show. So today in society, the American society has become unrecognizable to anyone who's maybe living in the 1950s, or maybe someone in the 1970s or 80s even. It's become completely unrecognizable. And I think that's part of the denial process of the society failing to come to grips with its inherently violent nature and deciding instead that these other issues are somehow defining. And that kind of decadence generally marks the end of a society. And I think that's what we're witnessing.
Well, again, like the cycles, they throw up the same planets of information, the same sort of phenomenon, cultural issues, for a reason, because we're in this matrix, we're in this simulation, we're in a video game sort of environment where it makes sense that as a great power, whether it's Rome or the empires, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, as the structures of our society, when they're disintegrating, as the U.S. empire is obviously disintegrating, and that's, visualized, you could see in Joe Biden, like he's a visual representation of the actual empire. He's, to the point where he has the amnesia, the United States of amnesia, like he has he has some sort of dementia, right? So he can't even remember the things that we are and were. So, but that's what happens at the end of any empire. They forget the foundation. They forget their greatness. They forget their principles, and their moral compass is totally off kilter. And so, people collectively, as a society, they feel that as our base, like lizard leech crawling out of the ocean sort of instinct, like we sense the shift in power and epochs and cycles. So you have those periods of insanity, or decadence, like at the end of the Roman Empire, or with the end of all the Austro-Hungarian and the Ottoman and stuff like that. You saw totalitarianism arise. And, people use that phrase all the time of Orwellian, and perhaps it's overused, but you can see clearly the manifestation of both totalitarianism and that decadence that you saw at the end of the Roman Empire, in that you have these transmorgification of human beings into these different beings, right? Like with the trans movement, for example. And the totalitarianism of it is the classic totalitarianism, is that you deny history. Like you can't say Bruce Jenner ever existed, for example, and that he won, he was an Olympic gold medalist runner. You can't mention that. And that he, as Caitlyn, can run. He's suddenly, just by calling himself like Caitlyn, that he's the same exact, physical being as a female. So it's just that's totalitarianism, that you can't even see you can't say what's in front of your eyes. What we all know is the facts. You have a hat that says Bukele 2024. It doesn't say Herbert 2024. But if I made you say that and agree that it says Herbert, it's just like messed up.
All right. I mean, there's a great urge to hit the reset button
Yeah.
and pretend like there was no past or was no history. And I think that in the American society, there's a desperate need to forget our history. We didn't want to talk about the genocide of the native population. That's been swept under the rug or glorified as manifest destiny, was the phrase that was invented to glorify the genocide of the native population. We don't want to talk about slavery, although that's been now come up and being actively talked about again. But that was something that was really a taboo subject for so long, and people don't want to talk about it. And so we have this need to kind of squeegee away the past and forget about it. The great corrective to allow for the truth to come out in a more spontaneous way, it would be freedom of speech. So the speech freedom has been curtailed. And with curtailing of freedom of speech comes the rotting of the discussion, where there's no real dynamism to public discourse. It's all in the channels preordained by, in this case, corporations. So you have no truth, what I call the Roman candle of truth. So remember a Roman candle? It's a fireworks where it comes out with little explosions. Boom, boom, boom. This is freedom of speech. You know, every few seconds, there's a new truth. And you have to deal with it. Yeah. Everyone has to deal with it because truth is always evolving. There's no such thing as objective truth. I mean, truth is something, it's a work in progress. And as our consciousness evolves, we understand truth differently, and it needs to be talked about and communicated. But this has been curtailed by the corporate agenda. And as a result, discussion has come to a screeching halt, and people are festering in their own psychosis. So society has become psychotic, essentially.
Well, I believe it's called totalitarianism. And I'll read you a quote from 1984 by George Orwell, which epitomizes that because, okay, there's freedom of speech and you could say whatever you want. But just like that moment in 3 Days of the Condor, like even if you got the evidence to the New York Times, the Washington Post, like even if you got all this, like the words, the information, what makes you think they would print it? So the totalitarianism enters whereby even if they print it, you have a crowd of people, partisan people, Democratic voters or Republican voters or any voters, like of any political party. Here's the quote: "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears." So what you could hear, you could listen to this podcast, you could see these words, you could see CCTV footage of the January 6th events, for example. And it was that, so you're supposed to reject that evidence. It was their final, most essential command. You must be loyal to the party. And even if you see, like, you know, this mentally ill Viking guy, like with a clown outfit on, like you could see from what happened on January 9th, for example, you could see, like when I watched that, before I heard everybody's assessment that got filtered through the party on MSNBC, I thought, oh, this is like buffoonery, right? It's just like, it's a weird clown show. You and I had also, of course, lived in Paris for a long time. So it's quite normal to have like the Elysee Palace or, you know, the mayor's office like stormed, right? Like this is just a normal thing there. And I was like, oh, they're finally becoming more French, but we're doing it with more style. We have like really cool outfits, like, you know, comical cosplay sort of outfits. And this is kind of wacky. But like that they keep on like harboring on this notion that this is like some sort of existential threat. This was like, you know, the storming of the Bastille.
Yeah, January 6th. And we had that cosplay in Washington, D.C., which somehow was transformed through the corporate-owned media into an existential threat for America, and that there was an insurrection going on in the United States. Yeah. And for if you're living outside of the United States in a normal country, it's just laughable. You're like, you guys are so funny. Is this a Saturday Night Live sketch? I mean, this is funny. You're not serious, right? Because you can't be that stupid. But apparently they are that stupid. But I think it just goes back to, again, this idea where the unwillingness to see the truth objectively requires an ever greater elaboration of the tale, of the story, of the narrative, of the drama. The last thing anybody wants to do is to look at this truthfully.
Yeah.
The truth is, if it was trading on the New York Stock Exchange, would be trading at zero.
Well, that was a sudden stop.
That was a sudden
Damn.
stop, because I knew that that's going to be clipped, and it's going to be showed up as a clip. So I gave some time for the memers to go ahead and clip that. Edit that, you clippers. And then I will continue. So the truth is the first casualty of war. How about that? That's a quote you often hear.
That's right.
And we're in a war. We're in all kind of war. Information war. We're in a hot war. We're in Thucydides' trap, which is turning into a hot war. We're turning into a cold war as a hot war. So the first casualty is always truth. I believe Orwell. When did 1984 came out? It was after World War I think.
Well, Orwell was writing between World War I and World War II. So remember, he was down and out in Paris and London and observing the rise of totalitarianism that culminated in World War II. So he was, in Europe witnessing the totalitarianism firsthand and writing brilliantly about it. That's why, I think that's always obviously part of some human nature to do this. And I suppose I'm just thinking about this because, people have been talking about democracy a lot lately. And that is always, just exactly as Orwell described there, that is a tool for totalitarianism. And in fact, it was Thomas Jefferson did warn about back then, that democracy could lead to despotism. And that is because of that ability that loyalty to the party to suspend any sort of, disbelief, that you will believe anything that they tell you. In fact, like to the granular level, that the things you can see with your actual eyes and ears are the exact opposite of what you see with your eyes and ears because they told you.
Right. There's that meme, 2 wolves and a lamb are voting what we should have for dinner.
Yeah.
And the 2 wolves obviously vote for the lamb. But the total ability in the United States, however, during the American century and the history of the United States was to allow some room for the freaks and the weirdos to think different, as Steve Jobs would say. And that was the saving grace. I remember back in the 1980s, there was this idea that Japan was going to take over the world, that the Japan factories were running more efficiently than in the U.S. factories. There was a movie with Michael Keaton about how he was working at a factory in America that was run by the Japanese and how the culture clash were existing. And there was a book called The Japan That Can Say No that was written by a famous Japanese industrial titan. And it looked like, oh, wow, the American century's over. Japan is on the rise. The Nikkei average was almost at 40,000 yen. And then what happened was the internet exploded in the 90s. And the internet favors nonconformity, whereas in Japan, the rise of their industrial might was based on conformity. And suddenly, nonconformity was the way that you become successful on the internet. And it was that Cambrian explosion of ideas and business ideas on the internet in the 90s, where that gave us Google, that gave us Facebook came a little bit later, but eBay and all these other internet giants, Amazon. This was all based on kind of the American garage independent thinker who creates a company from nothing and becomes a multi-trillion-dollar company. And that was really the change in the cycles at that time, the change in the shift. The Nikkei peaked at 40,000 yen. It got all the way down to 8,000. Now it's done better since then. But so we're at one of those moments. But I don't, because of this freedom of speech curtailment, I don't see how there's going to be a generation like a Steve Jobs generation to step in and innovate, because they'll be shut down.
I believe that you're wrong there, because I'm here where it's at. Like, this is El Salvador, and this is, just as you said, the Japan era ended because of Silicon Valley and the people there. So, if the Japan era had continued, there would be no Steve Jobs, there would be no Silicon Valley, there would be none of that. But here is where it's happening. But I want to say, going back to this duck and cover notion, like the boomers, the first boomers are born in 1946. The first atomic attack, nuclear attack, is in 1945, August of 1945. So, that's part of their DNA, is like literally the fallout from there. So when you're looking at the financial system those very people created, where they came up with the Black-Scholes options formula to separate risk from reward, to split something that shouldn't have been split, essentially, because that was what made capitalism work, right? Was the fact that the person taking the risk also took the reward, but they found a way to just keep the reward for themselves and split the risk, the toxic waste, for another group of helpless people over there, like who had no say, who weren't sharing in any of the reward if there were some. So, these same boomers invented a system that then collapsed with all their financial derivatives, or weapons of mass financial destruction, as Warren Buffett called it. He's not a boomer. He's older than boomer. He's the silent generation, I think, is before the boomers. So when that system imploded, of a sort of toxic implosion, nuclear fallout sort of situation, the boomers had the same response, which was duck and cover. Like, duck and cover is ridiculous, right? And so is QE, right? It's ridiculous. It doesn't fix the situation that you're in. It doesn't stop the harm. In fact, it compounds the harm, and as you're just likely to be melted under a desk. So that's like what the global economy is like. We ducked and covered. We're sitting under a desk, and you know what? It hasn't done us any good. That fiat system has been, their face has been melted off for the last 15 years since 2009. How many years is that? 2008 to now?
That's like 20 years.
50, no, that would be we would be in 2028, wouldn't we? So,
are we getting close?
Oh my God. I'm never going to ask you any question ever again. Like, you always give the wrong answer. Like, so confidently.
Well, be that as it may. Sure. I mean, the Black-Scholes option pricing volatility formula, as you say, was the separation of risk from reward, which was similar to the cleaving of atoms into matter and energy, which gave us the atomic bomb. We had the derivatives bomb, and then starting in the 1980s, and Reagan poured fuel on the fire by deregulating. So it's deregulating plus derivatives. It gave us the bull market of the 1980s, and gave us really a 40 to 42 year bull market in the bond market, because this was all a product of being able to take interest rates down to zero or even negative rates, was the use of derivatives, and you'd be able to take reward and put it into one area of the economy and take the risks and dump it into another area of the economy. When people say, oh, it's capitalism for the rich and socialism for the poor, that's a common meme that's been popped up for a few years since Occupy Wall Street. And what that refers to is this exact idea. Since the invention of derivatives and the cleaving of risk and reward into their separate components and trading separately, you have the ability for the Wall Street class of individuals to keep the reward and dump the risk using financial derivatives products.
Yeah, it used to be we always have done that. Humans have always done that, but it used to be way more expensive and inefficient in that you had to run an empire. So your people at home got to keep all the reward, and all the risk went to the third world that you occupied, right? You took their shit. You kept their gold, you took their gold, you took their labor, you took their wealth, and you dumped your problems on them.
You've hit on an incredible point here. In the old days, you needed to go into another country and steal their shit.
Yeah.
With derivatives, you don't need to actually do that.
No.
You just manipulate financial markets to steal people's shit.
Yes, yes. So it's way more efficient, but just like we've basically had nuclear power for our entire existence on the planet Earth through the sun, right? But we figured a way to try to condense it and maximize it and mess things up, right, in a big way. So, yeah, I kind of got lost of where I'm going with that.
It all started with your tweet thread that was published earlier today. That's already gathering, really garnering international attention. And journalists and pundits around the world are really forensically picking through this and coming up with jewels that were published earlier by Stacy Herbert. And it's about gold is for boomers, and it's a bet on death and destruction. And Bitcoin is for everybody past the boomers.
It's an escape hatch out of their hate asylum.
That's the main point. That's the theme.
So finally, before we go, I want to, in the last few moments here, I do want to discuss the fact that Marco Rubio came here and just, basically embodied everything that we say about here. We say, don't trust the mainstream media or the FUD. Come to El Salvador and verify for yourself what we say. So here's Marco Rubio. And if you look at him last year, he wasn't horrible about El Salvador, but he was not glowing about El Salvador. He didn't say the nice things that you and I were saying about what was going on here as the war on gangs was liberating populations, for example, in Soyapango or Popa or Ilopango, right? So he came here, he saw for himself, and just the transformation of Senator Marco Rubio. You could see it seeping. You could see President Bukele. You could see El Salvador. You could see what he saw seeping into him every day. He gets more. He's thinking more and loving more and more enthusiastic. And posted that amazing video, shocking, really powerful endorsement of President Bukele and what he saw here in terms of the liberation of the people and the protection by the state of the right to life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. What you see here, you have to come and verify for yourself because you can't miss it.
Yeah, don't trust, verify. And Marco Rubio did just that. He came and they sat with the president, and the video is remarkable because it really gives a whole encapsulates what's been going on and why everything is quite a special situation. Before we do go, I just wanted to ask you that during the New Year's time and Christmas time, there was some special foods that we ate. We had a special soup and a special sandwich that were provided by our friend Mario. Now, this is a special week here in El Salvador. Is there any special foods that we should be aware of?
Before I segue to that, I do want to finish up on what Senator Marco Rubio did here is that he did have dinner with the president. Obviously, the president is very charming and entertaining and a really smart, interesting guy. But he also spent a day and a half traveling around and meeting people and talking to families and visiting locations. So it wasn't just meeting with the president. It's important to say that he actually saw El Salvador. Right. He met people. In terms of this holiday, it's a Catholic holiday, right? And Easter but the Semana Santa. I will tell you this is, on Palm Sunday, which was just a few days ago, there was a bit of the 70s, the late 70s in America, the sounds that we heard on New Year's, you mentioned, of the M80s and the cherry bombs, which were banned in the United States since 1978, right? Because too many people blew their hands off and stuff like that. So now you can only have those sort of pyrotechnics if you have some sort of military license. Any civilians need to get some sort of special license to have those. But here, everybody still has them all over the place, and it's very loud. That was on Palm Sunday, and that's supposed to, herald the arrival of Jesus in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they used M80s back then as well. Jesus arrived in Jerusalem.
Exactly.
M80s were blowing up everywhere, so it's more authentic, I think, situation.
But apparently that's not. I did ask on Twitter, is this going to happen for the whole week? What happened back? It was supposed to only happen on New Year's. That's what we were told. But in fact, it started a week before and kept on going for a week after. So I was just questioning, is this something that is going to be around for a whole week?
Yes, it's a military ordinance. An M80 is pretty darn percussive. It makes an impression. When it goes up.
Well, people just were like, "No, Stacy, it's Jesus arriving in Jerusalem." Don't you know? I was like, okay, I'm just questioning my sleep pattern for the next week. Just preparing. I just need to know. Okay.
Well, we'll keep up on that. The food thing is always fascinating, and we'll see if there's any other special. We'll have to ask Mario. He's usually keyed in on that. But I guess it's time to go back out there and check and verify with our own eyes that things are splendid and happening here in El Salvador. Until next time, bye, y'all.